Hello all, welcome to the module on high seas and outer space. The legal status of areas beyond national territories has always attracted the attention of scholars. The Justinian Code has classified air, water, sea and seacoast as common good. In international law, the concept of global commons is generally used to mention certain resource domains that fall beyond the jurisdiction and reach of any single nation state. There are 4 such areas which are covered under international law, and they are the high seas, the atmosphere, Antarctica and outer space. The basic premise of commons lies in the term res communes, the idea that these areas are for the benefit of and of common interest to all nations, and these cannot be appropriated by any nation. These domains are guided by the principle of the common heritage of humankind and the open access doctrine. In this module, we will focus on the high seas in the first part and the outer space in the second part. The learning objectives. The module aims to discuss existing legal measures and international cooperation for the protection of high seas and outer space. It will also help to understand the relevance of protection of the global commons in the changing context of the technological and scientific advancements. The module will discuss the evolution of the legal framework, its major characteristics and the scope and concerns associated with its design and implementation. The module will provide the learner with the basic knowledge of the environmental governance and management of these 2 spaces. So first we move on to the law of the high seas. The ocean constitutes a fundamental resource for the existence of life and supports tremendous biodiversity. Marine area beyond national jurisdiction constitutes 64% of Earth's surface, and customary international law considers this area and the resources under it as common heritage of mankind. In modern international law, high seas are not open to a state acquisition, following the rule of res extra commercium, as it's a doctrine originating in Roman law, holding that certain things may not be the object of private rights and are therefore insusceptible to be being traded. The term high seas have been given different definitions throughout the period. The traditional definition states that high seas indicates all part of the sea that are not included in the territorial sea, that means within 12 nautical miles, or the internal waters of the state, and included contiguous zones and water over the continental shelf. The United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea 1982 defines high seas as all parts of the sea that are not included in the exclusive economic zone, that is within 200 nautical miles, territorial sea, or in the internal waters of the state or archipelagic waters of an archipelagic state. Under modern international law, it is defined as an area on earth not open to the acquisition on the part of states individually or collectively as per the rule of Rex Extra Commercium. The history of activities in the high seas has seen many changes in its inherent philosophy of access to the area and has reflected in the regulations for the same. The papal bulls in the 15th and 16th century divided the oceans between Spain and Portugal, and the 16th century also saw the rise of Britain as a major maritime power. The 17th century witnessed the wide acceptance of the principle of mare clausum, or the closed seas doctrine propounded by England, Denmark, Spain, Portugal, etc. In the 18th century, the Dutch favored the mare liberum concept, that is the freedom of seas. This concept was forwarded by Hugo Grotius, and it supported freedom of navigation and fishing in the oceans. Grotius, in his work Mare Liberum, stated 2 principles with regard to this freedom: that the sea should not be the subject of private or state appropriation, and the use of high seas by one state would allow the medium available for use by another. By late 18th century, the cannon shot rule for the territorial sea predominated, and the state claims to larger span of oceans came to a gradual end. In the 20th century, the efforts were undertaken globally to standardize the laws relating to high seas, and this resulted in the 4 1958 treaties: the Convention on the Territorial Sea and the Contiguous Zone, the Convention on the Continental Shelf, Convention on the High Seas, and the Convention on Fishing and Conservation of Living Resources of the High Sea. These were later codified into the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea 1982, or UNCLOS 1982. These international provisions were incorporated subsequently into various national legal systems by the respective parties. UNCLOS thus created a set of standardized rules for the management of the maritime areas and the activities allowed in the high seas. When we look into the freedom of the high seas in modern international law, we can see that the Convention on the High Seas 1958 was a major turning point in determining the international regulatory framework for the area. The Article 2 of the Convention on the High Seas 1958 provided that the high seas is open to all nations, and it also stated that no state may validly purport to subject any part of them to its sovereignty. The freedom of the high seas was asked to be exercised by all states with reasonable regard to the interest of other states in their exercise of the freedom of the high seas. Other rules or general principles of international law were also made applicable to the area. For both coastal and non-coastal states, the 1958 Convention allowed the following freedom: the freedom of navigation, the freedom of fishing, freedom to lay submarine cables and pipelines, and the freedom to fly over the high seas. These freedoms were later formulated to UNCLOS 1982, which replaced the four 1958 conventions, which added two more freedoms. They were the freedom to construct artificial islands and other installations permitted under international law, and freedom of scientific research. UNCLOS reserves high seas for peaceful purposes and makes any sovereignty claims invalid. However, there are certain exceptions to the freedom of the high seas. The following exceptions exist against the principle of freedom of high seas. The first one, rules of customary international law. For example, piracy, slave trade, hot pursuit, and any other pursuance of illegal activities committed by ships and other vessels in the high seas. Second one are the restrictions by treaties which limits the application of the UNCLOS provisions. For example, the Straddling Stocks Agreement 1995 and the Convention on the Conduct of Fishing Operations in the North Atlantic 1967, etc. International law relating to high seas have also a major role in the protection of marine environment. This body of law tries to address issues arising out of unscientific coastal development, pollution from ships, land-based sources of pollution, habitat destruction, and other threats. The Stockholm Declaration 1972 forwarded many broad principles that later paved the way to major international environmental regulations, some of which have relevance to high seas. Principle 7 of the declaration asks the state to take all steps to prevent pollution of the seas by substances that are liable to create hazards to the human health, to harm living resources and marine life, and to damage amenities or to interfere with other legitimate uses of the seas. Principle 21 specifically states that while exercising sovereign rights to exploit their own resources pursuant to their environmental policies, states should ensure that activities within their jurisdiction or control do not cause damage to the environment of other states or of areas beyond the limits of national jurisdiction. Article 193 of the UNCLOS, similar to Principle 21 of Stockholm, cautions states in exercising their sovereign rights. UNCLOS gives special reference to pollution issues like release of toxic, noxious and harmful substances to the high seas, and also pollution from vessels, installations used in the area, introduction of new or invasive species, etc. It also asks regional and global cooperation to adopt measures to prevent, reduce and control pollution of the marine environment from any other sources. Now, other than UNCLOS 1982, there are certain other international and regional arrangements which have an impact on the high sea conservation. The first one is the United Nations Agreement relating to the conservation and management of straddling fish stocks and highly migratory fish stocks 1995. This is an important arrangement in the development of a comprehensive legal regime for the long-term conservation and sustainable use of straddling and highly migratory fish stock. The second one is the UNESCO Convention on the Protection of the Underwater Cultural Heritage. This provides provisions for the states to protect their submerged cultural heritage like underwater caves, ruins, shipwrecks, etc. The third one, that is the International Whaling Regulation Convention 1949, aims for the protection of all whale species from overhunting and establishing international whaling regulations to ensure proper conservation and sustainable harvest of whales and development of whale stocks. Other regional agreements also include conventions for the protection of marine environment of the Northeast Atlantic 1992 that deals with the prevention and elimination of pollution, assessment of marine environment quality and conservation of maritime ecosystems and biological diversity. Now, there are certain jurisdictional issues which we need to discuss in this particular module, and the first one is the jurisdiction over the ships in the high seas. UNCLOS 1982 provides in detail the jurisdiction of the ships on the high seas. It provides that the ships shall sail in the high seas only under the flag of one state, and the exclusive jurisdiction of this ship lies with the flag state. In the event of any incident, any penal or disciplinary proceedings may be instituted against such person only before the judicial or administrative authorities either of the flag state or of the state of which such person is a national. It also provides that no arrest or detention of the ship shall be ordered by any authorities other than the flag state. The next one is the right of hot pursuit. This is provided under Article 111 of the UNCLOS 1982. UNCLOS allows hot pursuit of a foreign ship when competent authorities of the coastal states have good reason to believe that the ship has violated the laws and regulations of that state. The hot pursuit commences when the foreign ship or one of its boat is within the internal waters, the archipelagic waters, the territorial sea, or the contiguous zone of the pursuing state. The hot pursuit only can be continued outside the territorial sea or the contiguous zone if the pursuit has not been interrupted. The right of hot pursuit ceases as soon as the ship pursued enters the territorial sea of a foreign state. We will also look into certain institutions under United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The first one is the International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea. It is an independent judicial body to adjudicate disputes arising out of the implementation and interpretation of United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. It is open to all states and non-state entities. It is located in Hamburg, Germany. It has 21 members and it has jurisdiction over any dispute concerning the interpretation or application of the convention. The body exercises both contentious, that is Article 297 to 299 of UNCLOS, and advisory, Article 191 of UNCLOS jurisdictions. The next body is the International Seabed Authority. It is an authority established to organize, regulate and control all mineral related activities in the international seabed area beyond the limits of national jurisdiction, an area underlying most of the world's oceans. This body is located in Kingston, Jamaica, and it has an observer status in the United Nations and currently has 168 parties. It functions through mainly two principal organs, that is, an assembly and a council which has 36 members.